My name is Michelle Crepeaux and welcome to the North Carolina Maritime Museum in Beaufort. My job here is I am a conservator, so that may not be a profession you are familiar with. A conservator is basically an artifact doctor. Much like a doctor, my job is to help diagnose and treat artifacts and help take care of them in a museum environment. And today what I'm going to be sharing with you is an activity that we've developed here at the museum, which is based off of the Florida Public Archaeology Network curriculum that is meant to teach 3D problem solving skills and creative solutions to complex problems, and also kind of give you a little bit of an idea of what us conservators do when it comes to archaeological materials that come out of a shipwreck or maritime context specifically. One of the things we deal with in that context most often are particular types of conglomerate called a concretion. So much as the name suggests, a concretion is essentially a natural concrete which has formed around artifacts that end up buried in the ocean. So these artifacts can be affected as a singular artifact, but more often they are affected as like a large group of artifacts. These concretions often contain hundreds of artifacts of all kinds of different types and materials that are all trapped together in this natural concrete-like material. And as conservators, we need to treat those materials kind of individually. So one of our challenges is to try to break down this concretion and recover those artifacts from inside. But our challenge, of course, is we want to do this in a way that doesn't actually damage those artifacts. And it can be challenging. So you do have artifacts that are organic. You have ones that might be made of glass or ceramic, as well as things made of metal. So you have all types of different artifacts that will be affected differently by the materials and the approaches that you use to try to get them out of this concretion. As conservators, what we typically do is that we use a lot of mechanical techniques. We use tools essentially to help us remove this concretion. Our main tool is this device right here. It is known as an air scribe, and essentially what it does is it kind of functions like a miniature jackhammer, where you see this tip here. This is actually a pneumatic tool, so it uses compressed air to make this little tip here vibrate very quickly, and that, much like a jackhammer, will essentially pulverize that concreted material and eventually release those artifacts. And for more delicate types of materials like glass, we often rely on hand tools, which you may have seen before. Again, kind of like a doctor or dentist, we use things like this, which you may have seen at a dentist's office, or even scalpels, which you might see at your doctor's office. Anything that works to try to get these artifacts out of this concretion. So the activity that we're going to do today simulates, or sort of gives you a chance to actually practice being a conservator. In this case, we're using a chocolate chip cookie. We have found that a chocolate chip cookie actually represents a concretion and the artifacts that are inside very well, and the process of breaking this down is very analogous to the way that we break them down as well. So you can see the cookie represents the concretion, and the chocolate chip represent the artifacts of different shapes and sizes and densities and thicknesses and toughness, essentially. And instead of an air scribe, though, you're going to be using a toothpick. This toothpick, though, works very much like an air scribe does. So what your challenge is to take this cookie and figure out how you're going to get these chocolate chip cookies out of the cookie without breaking them or melting them or otherwise damaging them. That's very much kind of the problem that we as conservators face on a daily basis. So there's different techniques that you can use to try to pry these little chocolate chips out of the cookie. So what I need you to do is really think about how to accomplish your goal. How are you going to remove this chocolate chip without damaging it? How are you going to essentially separate the cookie concretion from the chocolate chip artifact? So your challenge is essentially to figure out how you can do this. There are all kinds of different ways. There's no real wrong answer, but you can sort of use it kind of like a jackhammer technique and slowly chip around the artifact itself. That's often a good one. But you do have to be careful as well, because every one of these chocolate chips you see on the surface, there may be other chocolate chips or artifacts underneath that you have to be careful of as well. So sometimes blindly stabbing your artifact isn't what you want to do. So maybe sometimes you just want to work more carefully and try to maybe pry out this chocolate chip by itself. But of course you don't want to get too aggressive, or else that happens. You tend to break the chocolate chip apart if you get a little too aggressive. Another thing you can do if you want to be a little bit more advanced is to incorporate chemicals. We also rely on acids and bases occasionally to help soften up this concretion, to help digest it a little bit. So you can also take a cup of water and sort of wet your tool right here and introduce that. That will help soften your cookie, and you can see it comes away pretty easily. What you probably don't want to do though is stick your cookie in the water, else it's all going to dissolve into goo, and then there's no more tasty chocolate chip cookie to have. So that's also something we have to be mindful as conservators, is that we don't want to overdo it with the chemicals, or else we're going to not only affect the concretion, we're also going to damage the artifacts. So this should be a fun activity for you and your friends or your parents to work on together, to see how many different ways you can separate these chocolate chip cookies from the cookie itself and get to be an archaeologist or a conservator right there in your own home.